I'm your host, John Sleeting, and today I'm joined by Joe Kuchta.
The people who I worked with at the Omnicom group of agencies were stunned.
Thought you were crazy at that point.
I would leave a successful career at that point to go work for what some people told me was, you're going back to the minor leagues.
Have you ever looked back and regretted that fork in the road? Have you ever looked back on that and regretted that?
I was scared. It was the scariest decision I made because you are leaving a very safe, comfortable, successful position. Looking back on it, not a single regret.
Hello, and welcome to Clear Conversations, the Entrepreneurial Legacies series. I'm your host, John Sleeting, and today I'm joined by Joe Kuchta. Before I introduce Joe, I want to pause for a moment because I want you, our listeners, to reflect on this series that we're kicking off regarding mergers and acquisitions, M&A very broadly, from internal succession to the buy side of the table, the sell side. Think about someone that you, as you listen to this episode, could forward this on to. This is going to be a rich conversation with Joe from his experience in both in a big corporate environment, but then also merging into a smaller firm professionally, then taking on internal succession where he became an owner, ultimately the CEO, working through multiple transactions, speaking through his strategic rationale for why he wants to buy companies, how to finance them, how to think about equity and debt, how to think about not only the financial capital, but the human capital and the teams to approach, the sourcing of transactions to the integration, when to integrate, not integrate. He's got some great sayings that help you remember all of the key success factors that Joe is going to be going through. And so if you can pause to think about who may benefit from this conversation, because we know at Clearwater Capital, we work with families that go through and they're buying companies and they're selling companies, and how that fits into their estate structure, how it fits into their personal planning, their philanthropic, their tax strategies, because these businesses and the growth of these companies come back to their personal balance sheets and affect their families. And we want to see families retain assets for themselves. Charity is important to them, and reduce taxes, both income and estate taxes, by being strategic regarding how they're approaching it. So please, you're going to want to listen to this entire episode and send it on to someone else that's going to benefit from this conversation with Joe. And we have upcoming guests that are also going to share their perspective on unsatisfying exits, from a board's perspective, from an investment banker's perspective. So we have a whole series set up on this subject because these are the questions that come into us very regularly from our clients and those that we come in contact with. So with that, I look forward to engaging this conversation with Joe. Joe, thank you so much for engaging in this conversation today and being in the studio and our sitting down as we kick off this series on mergers and acquisitions. It's going to be a delight. It's going to be a lot of fun, and for our listeners to get to know you as well.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. I've spent a lot of time both merging and acquiring and being acquired. So I think I have some insight into this, John.
Well, I shared a little bit in the introduction, but let's first have listeners come up to speed. And who is Joe Kuchta?
Okay. I have owned and run advertising and marketing agencies for pretty much my entire career. So as a business owner, I've loved the marketing and advertising business, and going all the way back to creating strategy, content, creative. I never anticipated, nobody warned me that I might be a business owner at some point. So I really set out in my early career to be the best advertising person ever. And then, as you go through phases of your career, you accumulate experience, you accumulate relationships, you accumulate knowledge of how a good agency or a good business should function. You keep getting successful to the point that somebody asks you to step in and acquire their family business that they started for 20 years, which was my path to really get into ownership. And after saying no about 3 times, because it scared me, you finally say, this is a great opportunity. And so the last 20 years, 25 years, I really have been more on the ownership side, which led to growing businesses and growing to the point of saying, wow, well, we should keep growing both organically with our own business and our own clients, And then comes that inorganic growth
Yeah.
of making acquisitions or mergers or acquisitions. So, the quick tally sheet was we bought a couple of small businesses along the way, got our feet wet in mergers, and then we took some bigger steps, took on some financial partners, and then really built a strong network of agencies with 7 agencies spread around the country to the point where we became large enough that private equity looked at us and we became attractive to them. Then we were on the other side of the table of being acquired.
So we're going to spend a lot of time going through those different phases as we pass the time today. I mentioned earlier you are an outside independent board member to Clearwater Capital Partners in sharing of your perspective and your view. And for listeners that listen to John Chapman's episode, the second time he was in the studio with me from earlier this year, we talked about the growth aspirations and that going from organic to also having inorganic, as you put it so wonderfully. I've latched onto it, not just hiring, but also acquiring. And those are different things as we even grow within Clearwater Capital. So we want to spend a little bit of time too from inside the Clearwater boardroom, the thoughts and the process of our own adoption of a lot of the things that you say and what we value from your history and perspective. And that's why I think it's great for our listeners to be able to hear it more broadly, right? Where they're not in the boardroom or have the luxury and the opportunity to sit with someone like yourself. And yet they're going to be able to gain your wisdom and perspective in our time together today. So as we step back in your career, in early on, you talked about working, becoming the best that you could be as a marketer in advertising and communications and how you did your work. So if we move a little bit towards the tail end of that, developing your professional career, to really looking at this opportunity in terms of owner, operator, how that all came together. What was that transition like before we get into the growth plans of the agency overall?
Great. I think like everybody sets out in their career, they always want to learn. They want to accumulate experience. They want to work for the biggest and the best, right? They want to stand around at a family barbecue or a cocktail party and be proud of what they do for a living. And I would say the first phase of my career, I was the same way. I accumulated a lot of quick experience with a lot of large companies. I happened to work for a Fortune 100 healthcare company, Abbott Laboratories in the Chicago area. And that got me totally in love with healthcare marketing, which as a young employer growing up, you never knew that healthcare advertising and marketing was out there. And then I happened to switch to the agency side of that, working for healthcare marketing agencies, with reporting some of the biggest agency networks in the world. So when you are already working with the largest companies and the largest agencies, I did run across a smaller independent agency as competition, and I met the owner, and he is the one who convinced me to come join his very small family-owned agency / business, which the people who I worked with at the Omnicom group of agencies, again, very large global network, were stunned.
That you were crazy at that point.
I would leave a successful career at that point to go work for what some people told me was, you're going back to the minor leagues. You're already in the big show. What are you doing going back to the minor leagues? And I think that's the mindset that didn't resonate with me. I said, if they're going to take that mindset and not look at me and what, that entrepreneurial spirit, so that really made the jump easy. And it was interesting to have, close to 10 years experience on the biggest levels and then go to a smaller business and you see the love of the game. You see the skin in the game of people who put their necks out and do things without a lot of safety nets. And they do things without all the bureaucracy of some of the larger ones, which I got very good at working within. And I really relished it. I thought, okay, here's a spirit. We can do what we want, how we want for our clients, which I think is the gist of any service business. And it just struck me. And I really loved that. And I think as we grew the agency, number one, we grew because of that spirit.
And I want to go back to that decision point, major Y in the road, right? If I look back at my own, major global corporate experience, when you go from big to small, it ends up being a one-way street, right?
Correct.
You don't go back, right? You can keep staying big if you wanted to stay big with different corporations, but for some reason there's this view when you go to a smaller organization, a boutique firm, a boutique agency, you're bringing who you were, you're bringing your knowledge sets to bear there, but some people still just want the big name on the door. When
True.
you look back at that, that's a major inflection point, because when you make that decision, it's like, I'm going to go try this experiment and do this for a while. As John Chapman puts it, right, there's a goodbye date. You expire on that goodbye date, you're not going back, right? That one-way street closes down for you. Have you ever looked back and regretted that fork in the road and wondering, or at least going through the mental exercise, wow, if I would have stayed in the quote-unquote big leagues, of how that may have played out for you? Have you ever looked back on that and regretted that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And at that inflection point, I was scared. It was the scariest decision I made, because you are leaving a very safe, comfortable, successful position. Looking back on it, not a single regret.
Right.
And I will tell you that you work harder, because now you're working for not a world of shareholders and a share price. You're working for one or two individuals who put their blood and sweat on the line to form this business. And I also noticed the people around me were saying, you seem so much more enjoyable with your career and what you're doing. Not that you didn't enjoy it before, but things I didn't think about consciously.
Right.
People were saying, wow, you seem so much happier.
Yeah.
And when you hear that type of feedback and you feel some passion for it, no, I think I really glommed onto that, John.
Yeah.
And that's what drove the next 20 years of trying to find like-minded people and grow and build, not big, but big enough where we could give all those same type of passionate people with their blood, sweat, and tears, give them a safe haven and know that they're not alone.
Right. I feel the exact same way.
Yeah.
When the day I left GE Capital and came over to Clearwater, right? Everyone knew my business card at GE Capital, right? But no one knew. It's like, who's Clearwater Capital? What is this about? So explaining that, but look back on it going, wow, there's absolutely no regrets. And I'm so thankful that transition ended up playing out the way it did for what I'm able to do and accomplish and the people I serve now. The episode immediately preceding this one with Anna and Natalie, we went through, and they were both from corporate law and also corporate marketing out in New York. And their kind of transition in their corporate careers to a smaller firm together in what they were doing with luxury real estate, and not looking back. So you said, now it's not for everybody, right? Some people have the dream of being an entrepreneur, but if they have the dream of being an entrepreneur, sometimes it doesn't work out, right? It fails because it's a bit misplaced. How can you set yourself up for leveraging your skill set for the greatest possible impact and service into the future? And that's what's going to make the difference. And I think you can have that without all of the circus and the bells and whistles that come with the quote unquote big leagues. Big isn't better, right? This is the case where smaller can be better. We always talk about the story of David and Goliath, right? And David having the advantages of who he was in terms of being smaller.
Right.
So huge deal. So you were excited, didn't look back. People thought you were crazy. Now you're going to a small organization and you're stepping in as an owner on day one. You were a team member on day one. What did that look like in those early days once you made that decision and made the move?
Yeah, great question. I was not brought on as an owner. I was brought in at a senior level. One of his partners was retiring. So I was, in essence, replacing one of his partners who we founded the firm with.
Okay.
And then 2 or 3 years into it, the owner, had said, okay, in 2 years, I will have done this for 20 years. That was my goal. He said, I'm going to meet my goal and leave this business after 20 years. So here are my options, right? He said his options were to sell to the larger networks of businesses, the ones I had just left.
Yeah.
Or his other options was to somehow find somebody to take it over for him.
Okay.
So that's when he approached me because he said, I see that you are probably the most likely candidate to take this forward.
So a lot of individuals, because let's talk about internal succession. A lot of individuals look at it and say, well, I'm going to have to sell my business outright. Well, that's true if you don't have internal succession plans, right? If it's an internal succession strategy. And sometimes that's family, sometimes it's not family. It had Terry Graber on a prior episode, fifth CEO for Power Construction. In the first two CEOs, 100 years now, I think they're just shy of their 100-year anniversary. The first two CEOs were family members. The subsequent, including Terry, were non-family member CEOs. So how the family still had ownership, but not necessarily in the CEO chair and how they're looking at it, but this constant dialogue regarding internal succession. So now what's going through your mind? How does internal succession play out for those listeners that may be owners, operators, and how they're running their companies? They're looking outside. They're thinking that the only exit is a sale, but internal succession is a possibility. What advice, what encouragement? I shouldn't say advice, right? Because we're not getting, none of this is advice, and we're not, consult with your professionals accordingly.
There's the legal disclaimer.
Right? Exactly. But
yeah.
The thoughts, right? The questions that come to mind, the sensitivities that come into play when it comes to internal succession before we get to external.
Yeah. I can speak to both what I felt in my dilemma, and then I think as the years went on in meeting other business owners, I think I also received a pretty good sense of everybody feels the same way. They only see it as black or white options. But then when you realize that there are more options out there for owners, I think in hindsight, from my personal experience, I didn't realize I was being hired as part of a succession plan when I was. But I think that was part of the plan anyways, to try to build a team of people for succession.
And so that wasn't known to you by the transition from the owner at that point in time.
Right.
But had that crept into your thought process? Was that part of your hopes, or was that?
No, like I said before, I respected this man. He was everything the big networks weren't. All the politics and the bureaucracy and the layers of management. He owned the place, and when we wanted to do something on behalf of our clients, he made a decision in 3 minutes. He listened, and working for a large corporation like GE or anybody else, you can't be that nimble. And by the way, I know it's easy for me to say, I got accused of going to minor leagues. That makes the big show, the big game, not as good. No, there's nothing wrong with the big game. There's nothing wrong with people who excel at that. They're very successful businesses making a lot of money and being in a lot of places around the world. I just know for my psyche, for my spirit, working back with somebody who's so passionate about it and being able to help him continue what he laid his neck on the line for 18 years before that. To me, I really got my head more around that than a very successful career that I was having on the big scale.
Okay.
So I know it's easy to do the David and Goliath, but there's nothing wrong with the Goliaths.
Right.
I think it depends on, and the more business owners you meet, the more you realize they resonate and have more of a feeling for being the David in the room. And that's okay. It doesn't make Goliath wrong. It just means there's a different spunk to David.
And if you want to play the role of David, it doesn't mean you're going to succeed, right? That's not foolproof either in terms of stepping out of your corporate career.
Right.
So we're not encouraging anyone to leave their corporate career and go start something new because all of a sudden, because all of a sudden the grass looks greener. Yeah. But for you and for me and for a lot of others and individuals that we've had as guests, it's taking this path, whether it's from early on in their lives or maybe a mid-career transition from a major corporation to a smaller business. Right. It comes into play. But you step into it, you have no aspirations of ownership. So when this is put out there for you, what starts going through your mind? So what's inside the mind of individuals that might be in companies right now that aren't in the ownership chair? How does that dialogue play out in a very healthy manner for both sides, for ownership and for the individual or individuals, plural, that may take on ownership of that organization?
Well, it's a tug of war. The first feeling is you're honored, you're thrilled. Mm-hmm. And then the second feeling is you're petrified. And so there was, the first feeling is I'd never signed up for this. I never envisioned this. I always envisioned me just being a great ad marketing guy. And then the more you start thinking about it, you think, well, okay, why not? You've been successful in the business. You've seen what it takes. Here's a wonderful opportunity that you didn't plan for that's laid out for you. So you start to warm up to it a little bit. So in the beginning, I found, and I think I can echo this as we met other agencies and we continued to build our network with other owners. It becomes an emotional discussion. It becomes a practical discussion. It becomes transactional. It becomes egotistical. It becomes all of those in a whirlwind, right? Because in the first case, I was solving his problem by saying yes. Mm-hmm. He was giving me an opportunity that I never thought I had. And I would, by the way, I was only going to do this with a partner. And we talked about that because there was somebody there. Actually, this is where it gets complicated, John. His son was the high tech, doing websites, doing all the tech end, and I was doing the agency end. Okay. And the two of us were already changing the nature of the business. We were growing already. We were getting more clients. And so the dilemma was he came to me and said, would you like to take it over? He said, I know you don't want to do it by yourself. You want to do it with my son. I said, yeah, I wouldn't think about it without him. So you think about a family business, there's some dynamics there where I feel like I'm already in the middle of this. And in the end, it worked out great. Okay.
And it had all been for the 20 years, coming up to his 20-year anniversary when he was making this decision to retire out. Had the business been all organic growth to that point?
Yes.
Okay, yep. So that's where we got a 20-year run of organic growth.
Correct.
And now internal business succession taking place with you and his son as partner.
His son. So my partner and I took the business over, and he, I learned all about valuations. I learned all about due diligence. I learned all about EBITDA. I learned all about all these things, which to me I had no idea about. And in the a year of negotiating, putting the paperwork in place, and closing the deal, we had set up terms where Mark, my partner, and I would buy him out over the course of 7 years. So he wasn't looking, the emotional part of it was he wasn't looking for us to mortgage our houses and risk everything. Yeah. He was very satisfied with a deal that paid him out over time, that made the burden on us easier. And so it was very friendly and very transactional at the same time. Yeah. And I say that both, they have to be transactional. Yeah. A deal like this has to be. It can't just be too emotional, right? And on the other hand, it can't be too transactional because there's always emotions involved. Right. And I say that because I think I've seen that over the decades.
Right. When you say transactional, I mean, the legal documents, the tax, going through the detailed financials, understanding your due diligence, even though you're working in the company, not taking anything for granted.
Right. And then the payouts of this and who gets this. And if, on the balance sheet of a business, there's always things that are in a little gray area, or who, healthcare benefits or retirement, cash balances, all of those things that, again, were foreign to me, which all of a sudden I got a little inkling into.
And so going through that, though, the encouragement, or what I'm taking away, the candid nature of the discussion. It can both be respectful and friendly, enjoyable, but also you can't shy away from the hard conversations of the technical transactional aspect of that, because you're doing yourself and your entire family and everybody come in contact with a disservice if you're not taking that seriously, and potentially also the seller. So internally, this is where some people I've observed shy away from some of those hard conversations, right. Some of those real candid conversations, because they're fearful of affecting the relationship. But if the relationship is strong and good, and these are the right people you want to be working with anyway, then it shouldn't be a concern. Share a little bit more about that dynamic and how you walk that tightrope.
I agree. Everybody can sit around the table and shake hands and agree and be on the same spirit of a deal. but you still need to get the paperwork done and have those hard conversations about very specific things that all of a sudden shift it to be very transactional. And in those transitional discussions, sometimes they become very much us versus them. And now we had a mediator come in, and we didn't have a lot of lawyers and a lot of accountants, but we did have a third-party mediator come in to help everybody with the valuation and help decide terms and things like that. And there were a couple of meetings that I remember walking away going, wow, why did we have to be talking to each other like that about some things? And again, there was nothing major. I've been in worse ones later on. But I remember thinking that this is the way deals get done, and you can't risk not talking about those things. You're not getting the details squared away until the finish line. Because if you do, I've also seen 3 or 4 deals fall apart at the very finish line because somebody didn't have those difficult conversations.
Okay. So this sets you up now. We're going through it on a first-hand basis. The founder retires, transitions the business to you and his son as partners. How many years is the total next run? And then we'll start breaking it into pieces.
Sure.
So from that point to your ultimate sell side, how many years was that?
About 10 years.
About another 10 years.
10 years.
And during that 10-year run, it was 7 acquisitions?
Well, no. The first 10 years was, here's how I categorize it. Remember I used the word petrified? The first 5 years, we were so petrified of ruining this business that we just made sure we didn't run the bus off the road. And I remember that. It was a relief to us that we could take this business. And along the way, guess what? We were growing.
Yeah.
So I think when we had...
Still organically.
We had 40-something employees when we closed the deal. And then wasn't 5 years later, I stood in front of everybody and said, no, we're not going to get big. We're not going to be huge. We're not going to be more than 75 people. And we were already at 100 people, employees. Okay. So we were growing quite nicely, which then fueled our discussions of, okay, now that we didn't run the bus off the road, what do we do next? Because we were starting to feel that people wanted to know, well, this is great. Can we play on bigger stages with, bigger clients, things like that? Nobody wanted to become a network, a global network. Okay. So we knew that there was a big open space between there. So we were looking at our needs. We actually, a small purchase of a market research company that we worked with. They were already a trusted partner vendor. And then an old friend had a agency out on the West Coast who needed a little bit of a help. So we kind of came in and saved them. And those 2 transactions happened within the first 8 years. Okay. So that all of a sudden we had a little bit of a feeling for what it takes to take in a couple more businesses and then integrating them into continuing the growth of us as an agency.
So let's start out with the first ones, because that's really an important transition, right? Going from core organic growth throughout. Yeah, you had your internal succession, but it was still the core business without now bolting on, bringing in, where it was disruptive for everyone, the seller, the buyer, the team when it gets to integration. So the strategic impotence, the strategic rationale always has to be a driver within these transactions. Why did it make sense? It may make sense for the seller. Why did it make sense for you as the buyer to step in with these agencies? And maybe not even specific is helpful. At the same time, what are the general learnings regarding, okay, we're gonna do our first acquisition here, second acquisition here. Here's the strategic rationale. What was your thought process? Yours and I think you said Mark was your business partner. Mm-hmm. What were your conversations like before you took that step?
Well, they were very strategic, and that's a good point. We weren't doing it just to do it. We weren't trying to grow just to grow. We were growing because we were, I believe, taking the right attitude of the agency and servicing our clients extremely well. We, for context and time frame, this is when digital marketing was just blowing up. Okay, so we're talking mid to late 2000s, and we weren't as savvy in the tech digital marketing area as we thought we should be. Okay, we were doing a adequate job with our current clients. So particularly the West Coast acquisition, they were already ahead of the curve with that, and they were doing some really good work for clients brand name, well-known clients in the tech industry. So it was really bolstering our capabilities to do that. So that was a very strategic add-on.
Yeah.
In the market research acquisition, he was running a relatively small. We were using them in a lot of our clients, and he was working with clients that we were hoping to get into. So it was strategic in that regard, and it made sense for both his business and our business. In that case, we left his brand alone. We didn't integrate him into our. But in the digital end, we were clear to integrate them into our agency so that our clients perceived that now we had this capability. It was important to us to continue to bundle that as our agency's competency and capability.
So now we're going to camp out on this, right? The to be or not to be, the to integrate or not to integrate question.
Right.
So let's define the word. What is integration?
Okay.
What does that mean? And there's another way that you've captured brands, the house, how you thought about that in total.
Right.
So how do you get to that decision point? What are the lenses you're looking through when you make an acquisition to say, no, here's a full integration or not, but what does integration even mean?
Yeah. Well, and this is where it can mean anything, right? So I don't think there are any hard and fast rules. And I can say that based on my experience, John, that I've seen a lot of different ways of integrating. Those two relatively small acquisitions for our agency, which was relatively small, we chose two different pathways because it felt right to have this 30-year-old market research business founded and known by this founder to keep doing that, but also supporting him and have a lot of, I hate this word, but I'm going to use it, synergy. On the other hand, to have that strong digital capabilities, it was helping their clients understand that they were now being supported by a larger agency. Mm-hmm. And it was helping our business and our clients understand now we had a digital capability that we went out and acquired and have now integrated fully into every team, every client team, every department that we were doing. So in that case, it really was important for us to do that.
And so some could be back office integration. What are you doing with benefits and payroll,
absolutely.
all that stuff?
Yeah.
And leave the front end team, so to speak, engaging with clients and in their own way. Some of it can then be taking that front end team and actually having them assigned to the various teams as part of that, expanding the capabilities for the clients. Yeah,
we always call it front of the house, back of the house. So there was always a lot of back of the house integration, whether it was benefits, payroll, the things that you could gain efficiencies with.
That bad word you don't like, synergies, right? Then.
Yeah, exactly. I'll try to avoid that word. But, like any service business, you have customers and clients. And the perception of what you're doing in order to help your services, your capabilities, your competencies to serve them better is what we always called front of the house.
Okay.
So it was important to us, the narrative of which they understood what we were doing. Yeah. They understood why we were doing what we were doing because in the end, it was for their benefit.
Okay.
So that's the distinction we made in this particular case.
Okay. And Joe, you've got just some great sayings. Not surprising from a marketing advertising background, right? But one of them that you shared with me was, are you a house of brands or a branded house, right? Yeah. Explain a little bit more of that those two thought processes. House of brands versus a branded house.
And that is by far something I did not invent. That goes,
I'm giving you credit though.
Well,
so that's
you'll give me credit because I brought it up.
Yeah, right.
And this goes across everything. We see this on the consumer level. There are companies that own many consumer brands, and sometimes you don't even know the company behind who owns them. In the agency network world, which again I was growing up in, we had a brand. Our agency had a brand, and we were all reported up to the Omnicom brand. So Omnicom was a house of agency brands.
Okay.
And then every now and then they would squeeze a couple of their brands together and a brand would go away. And their acquisition model, in which we knew because we actually were approached by them to be acquired.
Okay.
And we went through that dance because we wanted to learn about how they would acquire us. In their acquisition model, they would buy us, give Mark and I a 3-year plan buyout. And then they would likely take our brand and do with it what they want. They might assimilate it into another brand they had in Chicago or in healthcare. Yeah. But it wasn't a a lot of interest in listening to what we want to do with the business. And as long as they paid us out on a buyout, that was it. So I get back to that because we were proud of our brand, and we were not ready to give up our brand.
Okay.
That's what a lot of business owners do. They put so much blood, sweat, and tears into their business that's where it becomes emotional, like I mentioned earlier. And sometimes with the large S of an acquirer, whether it's private equity or a network, in my case, the deal seems like it's the growth, the finish line for them, and they're okay with that. But other times, it's an emotional tug of war. It's hard to get to. And in fact, I talked to John about that, John Chapman, and we talked a lot about the CCP brand. I happen to love the way you guys are going about your business because it reminds me of all of those entrepreneurial spirit. The people are doing things only on behalf of your customers. And as you could probably tell from my background, that resonates with me. Yeah. You don't want to lose that. Yeah. And as we go through your inorganic growth, there probably will be opportunities for somebody to come along and want to make you part of their business, but at what cost? If that takes your brand essence, your heart and your soul of how you're doing your business right now or have for 18 years, that would be a very difficult discussion for you all as a leadership team. And that's where it gets beyond the transactional side of it. It becomes pretty emotional. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with either side. But that's the brand, the brand essence, as I like to call it. How you build the manner in which you do business, which then equates to your brand. That's critical. Yeah.
And I'd imagine there's some individuals when they're on the sell side, and all of a sudden they're coming in, but they realize that their name over the door is going away because they're fully integrating in, and the brand and name is even changing in that there's resistance because of the pride, the ego, I built all of this and now it's just gone.
Right.
That comes into play with it.
Especially in a family-owned business where the family name is on that business.
Right. Absolutely.
Talk about even more emotional.
And so the house of brands versus the branded house. If a listener's out there thinking about or working on a potential acquisition where they're thinking about integrating it in, and do they change it or do they leave it alone to operate as on the front end of the house with keeping the name? What principles would you have them thinking through in making that decision?
Well, I think it depends on the vision of the organization as it moves forward. And I say that because if you're a business owner, it'll depend on who you're talking to about either acquiring or being acquired. Because I'll give you an example. Our next phase was forming an agency network we called Sandbox. And so Mark and I took our agency and we joined with two other financial partners who were looking to rebuild an agency network. They had experience and they had capital. And so
this is growth capital that came in. And a minority basis?
We is an equal partnership.
Okay.
Our agency became the foundational agency of Sandbox.
Okay.
And they brought money in and financing to bring the second, third, fourth, fifth agencies in.
Okay.
And we all agreed from day one that we were going to lose our brand and we were going to build this network and call it Sandbox.
Okay.
Because we wanted that feeling of everybody plays well in the sandbox. Yes. Okay. I had to fight with our leadership team who did not want to give up our brand name. Okay. But we understood the notion of where we were going. And in this case, it was conceptual, strategic, everything the way we did. So we went and we acquired 6 other agencies. Every one of those agencies gave up their brand.
Okay. 3
of which were, family businesses with names. And the answer to that for us, we made it clear from day one. If we sat down with you and said, John, we love your agency. You've expressed some interest in joining something larger without being sold out to private equity or this or that. We think we're the ideal solution. But just so you know, if you become part of Sandbox, you become part of Sandbox. We had that discussion day one. And, if you acquire 6 agencies like we did, we talked to probably 60 agencies along the way.
Right.
And I can tell you there were a dozen who that was a deal breaker with right off the
Okay.
gate. They were like, we will not change our brand. And we said, we understand that. We're building a
Respect
concept.
that, and we're done then.
Right. Now, that was in this scenario.
Yeah.
If I'm a business owner and somebody said, boy, I love to get you, we think we can help you grow your business and we think you can do this. We've got a loyal following to our name. We're going to let you keep your loyal following to your name. Great. Then there's a strong rationale for that.
Yeah.
Or if they say, look, we have stronger brand recognition and there we'll announce that you're part of this. I don't think there's a black and white answer, but I do think it's such a critical issue that it has to be addressed way early on. Otherwise, when it becomes later in the game, it could be one of those hard-fought tug-of-war emotional stories.
Right. The strategic rationale, you shared the first two, which to me sounds a little bit like product line expansion, capability expansion.
Yeah.
When you bring in outside capital for the sake of growth, sometimes the strategic rationale becomes growth.
Yes.
Right? You still got to run the business as a world-class organization and what you're striving to do. But sometimes the financial capital and the financial partners shift that rationale to be like, yeah, it's about growth. That's our strategic rationale. How did that dialogue play out and the dynamic change by taking in a financial growth partner in that way, the way you were thinking about the next half dozen acquisitions you did?
The world changed, obviously. When Mark and I, again, my partner, are calling the shots and we buy a couple of businesses that we know the principles and they make sense and it's really on a small scale and we self-fund them. So we're not even borrowing money, much to the chagrin of our banker who chided us for not using his money. Anyway, but when partners come in, again, at this point, we're about 100 employees. Our revenue was pretty strong. And they came in with a fair chunk of revenue to be equal partners with us. And then they were bringing more financing to really go out and acquire some agencies. Yes, you're sitting around the table now not talking about clients or business or strategy or creative or content. You're talking about monies and payments every month and who's going to return and who's going to measure the growth and how much growth and how are we going to get to this growth. Meanwhile, you also have to run this business over here.
Right.
So I had the luxury of having a partner who could handle more of the business. We call it back of house. He would handle more of the now financing bank relationships with our partners who they were really off to go buy the next couple of agencies. And I was running the front of the house. Not everybody's going to have that luxury. I found that out too in some of the other agencies we acquired. So I look back and I feel very fortunate because we were able to divide and conquer. But talk about the distraction on your business. You have a very successful business, you're running it, and then all of a sudden, all of this acquisition talk or other money talk or private equity talk, it is such a drain. And not just the owners, but the management team. So we learned that early on. And any advice I would, no, wait, I can say advice.
You can say it. It's not
is that you really need to separate church and state if you can. Otherwise, I think.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if your team, a leadership team is running your business or your practice or your firm, and you do seriously go down the road of entertaining acquisition, whether it's being acquired or acquiring, you almost need a separate team or two or three people whose becomes their focus. Yeah. Because when you start bringing in your senior account people or your senior leadership team in a business and you have them distracted by meetings with possible other senior leadership teams, things get emotional. Wait a minute, is this person going to be replacement? How are they in my role? And all of a sudden people start taking their eye off their customers, which to me is the cardinal sin of these kind of deals. Right. People want your business because it's wildly successful, wildly attractive. Yeah. And the minute you start diminishing the quality of the business you're running because of these extraneous things, to me, I've seen that happen. And that's, if I could tell a business owner anything, do anything you can to prevent that distraction. And it will be a distraction. You can't gloss over it, but you want to plan for it and mitigate it as best you can.
Yeah. And if I hear you right, taking the human capital inside of your company to split it, so you have focused people working on the acquisitions, the business development side. In a big corporation, right, in GE, we'd have a whole business development group
Right.
that's what they would focus on and what they're doing. But to try to create that same effect, whether you have human capital focus on the acquisition work that has to take place, as the rest of the business is focused on making sure that the business is running, the trains are hitting on time, you're getting things done, and you're still growing organically. You don't have this shift. It's a both and, not an either or in that thought process. So that's the human capital side. If we go back to the financial capital, bringing in an equity partner, right? Equity is more valuable than debt. So your banker's sitting there going, hey, I have cheap debt for you. Why don't you use this? And then giving up equity capital, diluting yourself in the process to bring in that equity capital, which is really expensive in a lot of ways. How did you make the decision between the debt capital and the equity capital to grow? And if you're going to give up valuable equity to a financial partner, they've got to bring more than a checkbook to the party, right? What else are they bringing? How do you think through that structure?
Good questions, because at that point in my career, I didn't think through it. I was like, okay, I had no idea. I knew how to run a good agency, but I learned, John, and you learn by doing that. Now, what I loved about how we built Sandbox is our equity partners came in with their own cash, and what they also brought to the table were financing, and we all agreed from day one we're not going to diminish our equity with the financing. So we never brought in private equity.
Okay.
We brought in banks. We brought in capital, VC, and we borrowed the money we needed to make more acquisitions, but we never gave up equity among the agency owners. So as we bought other agencies, some of those owners got equity. So the only people who owned equity in our business were the owners and the four of us who founded it.
Okay.
I subscribed to that wholeheartedly because I felt good about not giving up equity to anybody who hadn't already contributed an agency to our agencies. And that worked for 6 acquisitions. Now, not every owner, 3 of the owners wanted this as their exit plan. But again, we knew that going into it. 3 of the owners were fabulous, and they added on. We had a leadership team running this thing fabulously. So again, there's no black and white rule there. We had some criteria as we were seeking out acquisitions. We wanted successful businesses. We did not want fixer-uppers. We wanted strong client relationships, which to us was the gold. Not necessarily the revenue, but the strength of the relationships and the strength of how a client would leave or they would grow in their careers and we would follow and the agency would follow. We wanted strength in a leadership team. We looked at the second generation, including our own, knowing that those are the people who we wanted to be strongly running the business and subscribe to that. So we had our checklist of how we want to look. One of them was we wanted the owners to want to get into the Sandbox with us. But in 3 cases, the agencies are fabulous, and the owner said, I'm happy to do this, and my leadership team is for this, but I want to have an exit plan of a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it was. Okay. And so we were flexible enough to be able to do that. I'm not sure if we had private equity always in our kitchen on this, that it would have worked that way. Okay. We had that flexibility. Now, in the end, we grew to a point where we sold to private equity.
Well, we don't.
Sorry, I don't want to jump ahead, but you see what I mean. So you can have all the plans in the world, and then at some point you're like, it's private equity.
Yeah, and so to back up for another moment, talk about the financial capital coming in, the human capital of how you structure the team. Back to equity capital is more valuable than debt capital. Organic growth really can be cheaper than inorganic growth. Hiring can be cheaper than acquiring. Yes. It's another one of your sayings. Are we hiring or are we acquiring for what? How do you make the distinction between what you're out hiring for to build and hire in and hire a team, hire a practice, hire whatever it is, versus saying, no, we're just going to go out and acquire this, which would be more expensive usually in terms of what you're giving up, and you're usually going to pay a little bit of a premium for buying that. Right. How do you think about that hire versus acquire distinction?
Well, I think as we grew the organization, we were constantly trying to look forward. Okay, what do we need? It became a point of now, if we're going to acquire somebody, what is it that we need? Like if we needed specifically somebody strong in digital media, or at this point, social media was becoming very critical. Do we go out and hire some talent in social media and grow that within and put it within the team? Or do we go find an agency that's already making their mark in social media and acquire them?
Okay.
It became very strategic at that point. I would say the last acquisition we made, which was digital media, was because we couldn't hire enough of a digital media capability to bring them. And the opportunity came up and they were very successful at digital media. So it became worth the time, effort, dollars to acquire them.
Okay.
And there were other cases where we built up by hiring. And again, I think that had a lot to do with our vision for one agency kind of flowing everything into it.
Okay.
And but we still had those discussions.
Can we go hire it? Do we have to go buy it? But we need to do it to continue.
And it was
on your
mostly
growth,
about the
right?
disciplines. It was like, in our case, it was either easy to compartmentalize disciplines, media, creative, technology, things like that. So I don't know in other business situations if you can compartmentalize it like that. And then, of course, it's the opportunities of acquiring. You could say, oh, let's go out and buy it. But sometimes those opportunities aren't there for you. And you also have heard me say, anybody can acquire anything. It's the integration of it that's critical.
It's critical.
And I can't tell you enough that when we took 6 agencies and put them under one brand, 6 different offices in 6 different cities, one in Toronto, which was a different country, the integration of that was absolutely critical. And so as we grew, we had a team of people who did almost nothing but plan for the integration, not just benefits and not just payroll and the brick and mortar things, but the organizational chart. How do you build all of this? And strong leaders who are now threatened by 4 other strong leaders at their same level and title from 3 other cities. That became the biggest challenge. It almost became easy to acquire agencies. The difficulty
really
was,
the integration.
And I think the last acquisition we made, we had our integration down pretty good by then. But we had some
learnings along the way.
That's a good way to put it.
Learnings along the way. And so during this time, now the ownership is, you've got more participation in ownership in different ways that take place. But the hat that you're wearing is that of chief executive.
Yeah. Still
and so you're the CEO
of the agency.
of the entire operation. You have to. So then when you look at how you manage your own time, because you're setting up a team of people to focus on the inorganic, the acquisition, you've got people running the show in terms of the organic and what you're doing there. But you are involved with all of it. How did you manage yourself, your time, your clock, your health, your calendar? How did you do that for yourself as the owner, CEO, and putting all this together?
Well, luckily, it was not on me. Like I said, I had a strong partner, and he was COO. So a lot of the finance, the discussions, the presentations to the banks, the going out and finding acquisitions before I would meet with them, there was a whole team of people, including our first 2 partners, who really were focused on that. They didn't get to the front of the house much. So that made it easy, that the ability for me to have that swim lane and work with all these strong leaders who already had solid relationships with clients. The scope of it expanded, right? Mm-hmm. We had so many more clients, so much more revenue, but so many more people doing it. All we did was create a very cohesive team to run their business and understanding what Sandbox was doing. So in a lot of ways, it was gelling really well. In a lot of ways, it wasn't as much of a burden on me. I didn't have to do it all. I was certainly aware of much of it. I was involved in much of it, but I was also able to disassociate myself and focus on what I was best at, which was front of house, and my partner, what he was best at, which was back of house. And again, in hindsight, I was very fortunate, very lucky. And I understand a lot of businesses, a lot of owners don't necessarily have a partner like that or a partnership. So that's what made it tick. Otherwise, I probably would have, it would have been a lot more stressful. And I was, we were humping it. We were growing. It was fun times, but it was a lot of work.
Wait, and so by the last one, you felt like, okay, now we're getting this integration thing down.
Yeah.
So when you look back, and if you could rewind, taking all those learnings and those life lessons, critical success factors, what are the most important, big rocks, as somebody puts it, that you put in the jar? What are those items that when you look back, go, no, here's my life lessons learned when it comes to this work, where you really have to stay focused? The top 2, 3, 4 items that would come into play
As a business owner,
in pursuing, as a business owner, CEO, in pursuing your growth, both organically and inorganically, setting yourself up for great integrations to create value back for the people that you're serving. What are those critical items that you would say need to be put in place before you'd ever embark on even the first step?
I'm no expert in this, by the way, so I can only speak to the battle scars I have and what I went through. But I think the desire of not just you as a business owner, but your leadership team to grow. We saw plenty of other agencies who the leadership teams were like, I loved what we had over here. I don't want to get bigger. I don't want to grow. So sometimes you had an owner who was very ambitious and wanted to do that. And sometimes their close circle of leaders push back on them. Okay, so that makes any future path forward more difficult. Yeah. So I would think internally, I think the business owner should understand what they have, who's pulling for it and not. I think you should explore all your options as far as financing. Like I said, I ran across 4 different types of financing. I think it depends on the business and the business owner and what they feel is best for them. And the third thing we touched on a little bit is you have to have the most critical, forthright, honest conversations about what the deal looks like, what both parties want out of the deal, what it looks like on black and white once the due diligence, the lawyers, the auditors, the accountants come in. Because at one point, we were at a negotiation where the principals, the 4 of us, sat around the table and we all agreed on the same thing. But somehow when we went away, the 2 lawyers kept dragging this out and arguing about it. And it delayed the deal for 2 weeks. And the 4 of us looked at each other going, we've already agreed. Why are they just not doing it?
Right.
And
it's called billable hours. Not to be too cynical, right? But it's like,
but it was an eye opener to me. I was like, there's 4 people around the table who are going to take this business and run with it. We are in lockstep agreement on it.
Yeah.
And yet the lawyers are arguing with each other.
Yeah.
It gets complicated. And I think that's where my last point would be. It will get complicated the more transactional it becomes. Stick to your vision, stick to the reason of your acquisition or your next step, and don't lose sight of that among the messiness, because it does get messy.
Yeah.
And it can suck a lot of the excitement, the joy, and you almost sometimes forget, wait, why am I doing this again when all I'm doing is getting headaches?
Yeah.
And I've seen it almost every acquisition. We warned everybody. There will be a point where you will want to walk away from this. Yeah. And we say we will try to minimize that point, but at some point you get to a point where you're like, it's just not worth it to me. Yeah. You have to be solid in your conviction that you want to do this for the business. You have people supporting you in this, and that it's worth getting through some of these bumps, mountains in the road.
Well, and I say that a bit in jest in terms of the billable hours, because I would not encourage, you can't go through a transaction without having great legal counsel alongside you in order to get it done. And there are a lot of great attorneys that are out there that try to keep it as simple as possible, never simpler, to accomplish what it is that you want to do as a business leader. So I say that partly in jest, but you do need to go and make sure you're retaining a great M&A attorney that's different from your estate planning attorney, right? That's different than maybe your general counsel attorney. You need to have experts in all of these areas. And when we walk through transactions with client families as they're going through it, that's a big part of it. And then as professionals, they're also collaborating back with the other professionals around the table to make it as seamless as possible, because these are complicated. It's just going to be the nature of it. So you better have the patience and also take your motion sickness pills, because you're going to be on a roller coaster up and down in the emotional side of it, and also the frustrations that just come in. But that's the nature of these transactions as you embark on that.
Yep, that's a great point. You need lawyers, accountants, auditors who have seen this movie.
Right.
Especially if you haven't. I mean, early on, I haven't. I'd never been through due diligence. I've never. And so when we were at least had lawyers who were used to these kind of acquisitions who could say to us, yeah, these are normal. This is what goes on. These are normal terms. You feel much better about it, and you feel like you have support of people. And if you're, depending on the size of your business, if you only have your business lawyers and business accountants, you have to, it's the best thing you can do is reach out and find help who have seen, we call it, have they seen this movie so they can help you understand that without a doubt.
And that's what we'll have as we play through this series, having an individual's perspective on an unsatisfying exit. What does that look like? A fellow board member, when we went through a transaction together and the family said, for the two of you to talk through, what does it look like from the board's viewpoint? And then the investment banker's view as we go through this, because there are a lot of different perspectives that have to come together to execute this. But when you come alongside families that sell, maybe one company, maybe two companies, but they sell a company that they built in a lifetime, and this is going to be their monetization and exit plan.
Right.
The calls come back in all the time to me. It's like, okay, but I haven't gone through this before. I'm going through this one time. And there's one shot for them. We maybe work with a lot of different families that are going through various transactions, but there's one shot for them, and you got to make it right. So you have to have the right table of professionals around the table to make sure that they're accomplishing what it is that they want to accomplish as they exit. Which now you go from acquiring all of these businesses over time and growing the firm and adding to teams across the U.S. and into Canada, but then all of a sudden, at a certain point, you have an exit yourself. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about that exit. What shifted, what changed, what allowed that to take place? Again, the strategic rationale to say, yeah, we're moving from the buy side of the table to the sell side.
Okay. So again, we had partners, and they had a financial partner. So we had a firm. I don't know what to call them. We paid them royalties. They never took equity in, but they gave us enough money to make the last purchase. So after the last purchase, we were considerable size. Everybody was happy. Now we had been in existence for 7 years. Okay. And so everybody goes for that, 3 to 5 years, and then we, sell it and make money. So everybody was like, oh, we're at a formidable size now. Our finance company said, we've seen enough here. We think we can get what we want out for our shareholders. So we would like you guys to either find somebody to buy us out or sell it. Our two financial partners said, hey, this has been a great run. We've reached this here. So it was really the finances that drove it to say, let's find somebody who's going to put the money in to invest it, when we're thinking we being these folks wanted the money that they've already invested. They wanted the reward for it. So it became finding the next person. Now, we had some serious discussions about that, knowing the next person was probably going to be private equity. Anybody who can put this much money into our business as we had grown it was either going to be a large network who was going to come in and buy us, which I was dead set against, or it would be private equity. Either way, it was, in a lot of ways, it became not as much of our choice anymore. It was going to happen because the money wanted to pull out and get their money.
And it's really tough to do an internal succession with one or two people.
We were way too large
way
to
past
do an
that.
internal succession.
Yeah.
So, you had asked earlier about regrets. I think the only regret I had is maybe trying to look for an alternative, creative way to finance it. Like I said, we were rolling and rocking. We had good agency mojo. We had it going, and I understood it pragmatically what was going on from the finance standpoint. And eventually, we did what big agent companies do. We shopped around for 6 months, found 5 or 6 different companies who were really interested in this, did management meetings left and right. So again, that focus, I and much of the team were part of that as we're trying to keep this business humming. Yeah. And eventually we closed a deal, right before COVID, with a private equity company who, by the way, was doing the same thing. They had already rolled up 4 or 5 businesses. So strategically, it made perfect sense.
For them,
they were going to take, and that's what eventually became Merge, which is what it is now. So Sandbox became Merge. And now this firm, this little company that I used to have, is close to 800 people. and I don't even know what their revenues are, maybe 180 million in revenue. So they've become a significant player, but they're still not a global network. So they still play wonderfully in that middle space, and they're finding their business fabulous.
So when you look at this terminology, entrepreneurial legacies, we talked a lot about your entrepreneurism, the thought process, the mindset, and how you navigate what you did. When you look back now, what are the most proud moments? How do you define legacy? What does that mean? What does that mean for you professionally? But what does that mean personally too? When you're with family at the holidays and everybody, I mean, what are you most proud of what you did that your family also looks at you and they're like,
yeah, that's a great question. I think we can call it all the cliches you want about entrepreneur. I love the spirit of business owners. I loved when I went from being an employee, a paycheck employee for a large company or a large network, and I could be at cocktail parties or barbecues and say, well, I work for these places, and people go, wow. And then they have to explain where you're working now, going, wait, what? But I love the spirit of that. And as we grew, surrounding myself with other people like that, who had that spirit, who had that ownership spirit, I love that. And so for me, that was the be all end all. I look back proudly on that. I look back proudly that we built a pretty significant organization on the shoulders of those kind of people. In all of that, we're kind of glossing over. It was financially successful for me because as we grew and I was a partner in the equity. So from a family standpoint, I was able to retire at 58 with that last deal. That last deal was my exit point, planned for, and I was thrilled and felt very fortunate that I could be relatively young and able to, even though I was not an owner of this family business when it started, I became part of the ownership of that. And so part of my legacy is all 3 of the 4 of my children work in the advertising business. Yeah, right. And so I think
rubbed off on them a little bit?
Yeah, they seem to see me do my job and like that business, and they're all very successful at it as well. So now, if I had a family business, would they be a succession? I don't know. I don't have to worry about that anymore. Right. But
so the fact that you enjoyed it, right? And I'm still struck with what you said earlier in this conversation, which was people around you, when you shifted, people around you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm recalling it here, you were more enjoyable, more relaxed, more pleasant to be around. I'm just the stress that came off, all those sort of things. And no one knows that better than your children, right? When they see that.
Right.
And that's what we'd want for everybody. How do you put yourself into a scenario where you're all of those things and you're going to thrive with where you're playing? You're going to thrive in the work that you're doing. And you're probably going to be healthier and just a better human being by being able to enjoy that. So even though all these people were saying, why are you going to the minor leagues? You wouldn't trade it for anything because you know what? Your kids are the biggest dividend that come off of that kind of an investment too.
And again, it sounds like another cliche, John. It goes from being a job to not being just a job anymore. When you're in that, all of a sudden, all these other things come up where you're running a business. You're helping somebody's lifelong passion. And it's not just getting a paycheck anymore. Yeah. And again, there's nothing wrong with having a job for your entire career at a place where you're getting paychecks. But I thrived on the ability to go into any swim lane we wanted to have, make decisions that were best for our clients or best for our employees. I mean, some of the things we did benefits-wise and individual cases for our employees, a large corporation would never see their way of doing that. I took a lot of pride in that we were able to, we had the livelihood of 40 people and then 70 people and then 100 people and more people. And we embraced that. We loved being able to do sometimes unorthodox things on behalf of our employees. And I think our employee talent levels were high, the camaraderie was high, and the clients sensed that. Yeah. Our customers knew what a unique spirit our business had, and because of the way we treated them, because of the way we treated, I look back on that with a lot of pride because we built something in a manner of what I thought and other people thought was the right way to do things. Yeah. And when you do things the right way, you may never be major leagues again, But boy, we played on a pretty good level. And the agency, by the way, which beyond me now has taken off, I would say they're in the major leagues.
Yeah.
Again. So some
creating
of
the opportunities,
some of that
creating the
leadership
jobs,
team I had is thriving in that way as well.
So now you sell retired, but you have going back to college days. I'll say a lifelong history, especially with Al Kraus, our CFO and partner, and John Chapman too from college days, and coming onto our board, right? So for listeners that are part of this conversation, to give them a glimpse as an outsider into the boardroom dynamics of the rest of us, what should listeners, clients, individuals, whether it be prospective clients, whether it be individuals that are thinking about, hey, I want to bolt on to a larger, more significant firm myself, what would you want to share with them regarding our internal dynamics of our boardroom, but our team, how we're thinking about some of these things and how you're shaping our thought process, because we've been nearly 20 years of organic growth,
Right.
not too dissimilar to your own, the path before the gentleman pass the baton on to you. Help listeners get a glimpse into how we're thinking about all of those things as a firm.
I love that spirit of starting something up for yourself. So along the years, when you start sharing my trials and tribulations with their trials and tribulations and doing that, and now that I've closed the door on my involvement in that, I have enjoyed and taken a lot of pride in helping other firms do that. I've advised a couple of other agencies as they've gotten acquired. So I've been on a couple boards in that regard. When we were just having casual conversations about this uniqueness of Clearwater and how you are looking at growing after 18, almost 20 years of organic growth, how do you make that balance of inorganic growth? And that's where I'm like, well, I just lived through that. I think I can help. I think I can help you guys. So I wouldn't do that with just anybody. And part of that is a lot of the things that you heard me say really resonated with me. The spirit, the care for your customers and your clients. I mean, I love the mantra you have is we will do what's right by our clients no matter what. That's how we felt about our customers and clients. I'm stunned that other companies don't necessarily put as much prominence on that, but you do. And that's everything you guys are trying to do. Now, again, you're so far from the advertising world that I was, but in the end, the businesses are strikingly similar. Your approaches are exactly the approaches that I've always embraced. And if I can help you as an organization, you guys as individuals, acquisitions that come in and become part of Clearwater, I'd love to help, because I wished 20 years ago I was getting that kind of help. I kind of went through and got a lot of learning by trial and fire. And I look at it now that I'm happy to help anybody with one less battle scar. Then that's better for everybody.
And as we look at the team, right? So our board is one thing, but we even talk about that internal separation and focus and how we're approaching things. For listeners that are thinking about, and again, this is where I think business owners have to get out in front of this subject, whether it's buy or sell side, in terms of the strategic rationale, in terms of the planning. What does it mean not only for the business, but what does it mean for their personal balance sheet and how and where you hold assets? I've had way too many conversations with business owners that are holding everything in their taxable estate. And it's like, do you realize that, this is the proverbial, the family's going to have to sell the farm to pay the taxes? And I've had individuals completely unaware of how estate taxes apply to the business and the valuation of the business inside their taxable estate. So if you're thinking about buying, selling, right, how you structure around that, contact me, John Sleeting. If you're thinking about maybe selling your firm and merging in with a firm or that succession plan, Joe, I know the work that you do on the board with Al and John in particular, where we divide and conquer in terms of how we're doing things, to connect with you, to connect with John Chapman, to talk through, hey, here's what we're thinking about. I really, who knows who's listening to this, but we're really growing in both of those aspects into the future. And also that it's absolutely got to be right for the person joining us, right for the clients that we're serving, right for the firm that might be coming in terms of how that integration works. There's a lot to really process and digest and go through all of that too.
It's a life-changing event.
Yeah.
You said it earlier, in some cases it's the only life-changing or the biggest momentous one. I'll go back to what I said earlier. Find and surround yourself with people who have seen the movie so they can help you navigate this.
Yeah. So please reach out.
Right.
So those that want to continue the conversation, please reach out at clearconversations@ccpwealth.com. Joe, I'm so delighted that you were in this conversation today. Have enjoyed getting to know you more recently as part of our board at Clearwater Capital, and I can understand the history that you have with John Chapman and Al Kraus and why they respect you, who you are as a person, your voice around the table for us, because you've seen this movie before and working with all of us in terms of our next steps. So listeners, thank you for dialing in today. If that's even a term, in participating in this conversation, wish you well. Have a blessed day.